What if the biggest immigration story in Canada is not the number you keep hearing on the news? What if the real story is hidden in a category most people never even talk about? Inside the House of Commons, a statement was made that could explain why rent keeps climbing, why entry-level jobs feel harder to get, and why our systems feel overwhelmed. But here's the strange part. The number everyone argues about might only be a small fraction of what is actually happening and hiding by the government. So let me ask you this. If you were told 500,000 people came, but the real impact was 2 or 3 times bigger, would that change how you see housing, taxes, and your future? In the next few minutes, you're going to hear an exchange that most Canadians will never watch, but it could change how you understand what's happening in this country. Do not skip, because once you hear this, you can't unhear it.
How does this touch upon youth unemployment?
Right. Well, what happens if you're bringing a lot of temporary resident students who then are working, so they're taking the kinds of jobs I would want to have if I'm 16, 17, 18.
What you are about to hear next is a direct question inside Canada's Parliament that challenges the foundation of the country's immigration policy and its impact on housing and healthcare. In the next clip, former MP Costas Menegakis confronts immigration scholar Michael Barutciski with a serious claim that the current state of immigration may represent one of the most damaging public policy failures in a century. When you hear the number 500,000 permanent residents, it may sound large, but the warning in this discussion is that this number is only a fraction of the real story. Ask yourself this. If policy grows faster than housing supply, what happens to rent? If population grows faster than hospital capacity, what happens to wait times? If planning does not match reality, who pays the price? Listen carefully to what is said and also to what is implied, because this conversation sets the foundation for everything that follows.
Barutciski, you have described the current state of immigration as possibly the country's worst public policy failure in a century. Can you elaborate on how the Liberal government's failure specifically destabilized Canada's ability to provide housing and healthcare?
Well, I don't know if I can help on specifically housing and healthcare, but in general, there are large numbers. We were just talking about permanent residents, and we were going up towards 500,000, but that's only a small part of the picture.
What you are about to hear next may be the most important part of this entire discussion. If you think the debate is only about permanent residents, you are about to realize that the real story may be much larger and much more serious. Michael Barutciski states that after the pandemic, there was a massive explosion in temporary resident categories. Not a small increase, not a minor adjustment, but numbers that were 2 to 3 times higher than permanent resident levels. Ask yourself this. If government targets are publicly announced for one category, but other categories expand rapidly at the same time, can infrastructure, labor markets, and local communities realistically keep up? What this really means. When temporary resident numbers expand rapidly, they create immediate demand for rental units, basement apartments, shared accommodation, and short-term housing. This can accelerate overcrowding in certain urban areas and push local rental prices higher, even if permanent resident targets remain stable. Rapid, short-term population growth can distort data used for policy decisions. When people move in and out of status categories quickly, it becomes harder for planners to forecast school enrollment, transport capacity, and even food supply chains, leading to long-term structural pressure that is not visible in simple headline numbers.
And the way that happened from right after the pandemic period, there's a huge explosion in various categories of temporary residents. We were never really even told about that. We couldn't plan for that. And when I'm saying 2-3 times more than the permanent residents. So it doesn't make sense to talk about immigration in Canada by focusing just on permanent residents. Just that little simple point, but it has huge implications because we're talking about many more immigrants, temporary residents.
What you are about to hear next moves this debate into something even more personal. This is no longer just about numbers, policy targets, or statistics. This is about young Canadians, which is 16, 17, 18 years old, trying to enter the workforce for the first time. Costas Menegakis questions whether large inflows into low-skill labor markets may be impacting GDP and youth unemployment. He is not asking whether total GDP is rising. He is asking whether the structure of the labor market is changing in a way that affects the next generation. Michael Barutciski responds by pointing to a simple but serious scenario. When temporary residents and international students enter the workforce, they often compete for the same entry-level positions that teenagers and young Canadians adults depend on for their first experience. Listen carefully, because this question touches the future of Canada's youth labor market. What this really means. When entry-level labor supply increases rapidly, employers have more choice. This can reduce pressure to raise wages or offer flexible hours to young workers who are just starting out. If youth struggle to secure first jobs, they miss early skill development such as customer service, time management, and workplace discipline skills that strongly influence long-term earnings. When young people face delayed entry into the workforce, it can lead to higher dependence on family support, student debt pressure, and lower savings rates, all of which have long-term economic consequences for the country.
Now, you've also argued that letting in so many people into the labor market in low-skilled jobs have actually lowered GDP. So, similar question: how does this touch upon youth unemployment?
Right. Well, what happens if you're bringing a lot of temporary resident students who then are working, so they're taking the kinds of jobs I would want to have if I'm 16, 17, 18. I'd want to work in a fast food restaurant as I did. I'd want to do these things. And if your competition is a lot of people from poorer countries.
What you are about to hear next is disturbing. Michael Barutciski explains that many students coming from poor countries are not really studying. They enter Canada under study permits, but mostly participate in the labor market. This creates housing pressure, increases competition for low-skill jobs, and strains public services. It is a reality most Canadians never see. What this really means. Students enter the labor market, competing directly with local youth and entry-level workers. This reduces job opportunities for teens and young Canadians trying to gain experience. Oversight is weak, making it difficult to monitor whether students are actually studying. This weakens immigration policy and reduces accountability in the system. Public trust and future planning are at risk when data does not reflect reality. Policy decisions based on misleading information can have long-term structural consequences. Urban housing demand rises dramatically as students cluster in rental-heavy areas. Rent prices and cost of living increase, even when permanent resident targets remain stable.
As a discussion paper from the Bank of Canada was telling us, poor countries bring certain kinds, lots of younger people, they're studying, but they're not really studying.
Thank you, Professor Barutciski, and thank you, Mr. Menegakis.
Today's video revealed a side of Canada's immigration system that most people never see. We learned that permanent resident numbers tell only a small part of the story, and temporary residents may be 2 to 3 times higher than official figures. We saw how this massive influx strains housing, healthcare, and public services, while also impacting youth jobs and wage growth across the country. We discovered that many students coming from poorer countries are not fully engaged in education, but enter the labor market, increasing pressure on housing and entry-level jobs. These are harsh realities most Canadians don't have access to, but understanding them is crucial to seeing how policy decisions shape everyone's daily life. For more in-depth breakdowns of immigration, housing, taxes, and Canada's future, subscribe to Canada Insight Network. Stay updated with immigration news, Canada current affairs, House of Commons breakdowns, and new projects coming to Canada.